we played with opportunity funds into a company like Purple at 50 to 100 million, or an academy between 50 and 100 million, or a slice also at that level. And today they've all passed the unicorn mark for what it's worth. And I'm judging the founders, but then also I might have been fooling myself if I knew this for a fact. But now I'm actually quite clear that all of them want to build these companies to lever the power of compound, meaning they can still grow 10x from here. So when you take the totality of that multiplier, it's just an amazing journey.
Warren Buffett says, "My wealth has come from a combination of living in America, some lucky genes, and compound interest." We all know Warren Buffett as one of the best investors and richest persons in the world, with a net worth of over $100 billion. dollars. But do you know that nearly 98% of it accumulated after his 60th birthday? Morgan Housel, the author of the best selling book, The Psychology of Money, theorizes that if Warren Buffett started investing in his 30s, like most of us, and stopped in his 60s, again, like the rest of us, his net worth would be less than 1% of what it is right now. In other words, the genius of Warren Buffett is not only that he picked multi baggers, but because he stayed in the game of compounding for so long. Welcome to the second season of the Blume Podcast. I'm Rohit, I lead marketing at Blume, and I'm your host today. Our guests in the second season of the podcast exemplify compounding. These remarkable founders have dedicated their lives to building generational companies. Despite facing numerous challenges, setbacks, and near death situations, they have persevered, always believing that there is something more to be done. With their unwavering determination, they have compounded their ideas and resources into multi-billion-dollar enterprises. But instead of talking about their valuations, in this podcast, we talk to them about tales of courage, anecdotes of resilience, and of course, the stories of compounding. Today, we talk to Karthik Reddy, co founder and managing partner of Blume Ventures, and the host of the second season of the Blume podcast. Karthik, last year the theme was X Unicorns. This year, we are talking about the power of compounding. So, is it a shift from X Unicorns? Is it more of the same? And what is your inspiration behind the power of compounding?
Thanks, Rohit. It was, as you know, the annual podcast theme kind of slowly emerges out of the womb of what we come together to put a sort of an idea behind Bloom Day every year, and that's been the way we've progressed this. And if you see the Bloom Day T-shirt this year, it's form is temporary, class is permanent, which is a way of saying that when you build long-term sustainable organizations, that's when you're deemed remarkably sort of memorable and world-class and long-term. And what we see in the venture world is a lot of celebration of fleeting milestones, which may or may not survive. And it comes from this underlying thought of the fact that to be able to build with some degree of attempted permanency, you need to be able to compound value for all stakeholders. It's not about valuation and it's not about investment, what it returns to the investors, but it's also about how it compounds in terms of in its its recall to customers, its value to every person who's built that company along the way, the team, and so that I think was the motivation when we got the podcast kickstarted. So primarily, my motivation, if you look at, we'll come to who are the guests, etc. But when you look at what I was attempting here, I wanted the narrative to shift away to a new set of role models. So if you look at our mainstream media and what we've been tom-tomming in the venture world for the last decade or so, we've been constrained by playing who gets fastest to sort of unicorn stage, and that is not the true test of whether these survive and become very large companies. Ones that have been built, I think the idea of showcasing these companies in the Power of Compounding series is that they might have been built slowly, but founders didn't build for valuation. They built for sustainability. They built for profitability. It's a lot of the time, all of that is a very non-sexy venture narrative, right? But that's the thing. It's only seemingly. I think the biggest of venture paradoxes actually is that the entire ecosystem earns its stripes by sort of claiming trophies around such legendary companies, or having their portfolios acquired by them. And those are the companies that have compounded the longest, right? And it's not by the ones that come and go in 3 or 4 years. And such outcomes have to compound dramatically post the 7-10 year mark, sometimes longer. So to actually draw a very objective delineation between exunicorns and compounding, exunicorns was the tough, arduous route through the first 10 years. Power of compounding stories were picked for the possibilities of the scale past 10 years. And that I think is fundamentally what we're trying to bring out this year.
Amazing, Karthik. Amazing. Double clicking on compounding, we have all learned about compound interest and compounding in school. But still, many, if not most of us, struggle to grasp the true power of compounding. Why do you think compounding is such a difficult concept to understand? And what could help people understand it better?
So you opened your introduction with Warren Buffett's quote, and he is also attributed, whether other people said it or more or equally, he's also attributed for having called compounding the eighth wonder of the world. And it's because, as you said, he has seen the power of it. He has seen what it can do for wealth creation, and eventually he reached a point where he started funneling that capital back towards charitable or societal impact causes, right, along with Bill Gates, etc. So I think what people don't realize is it is a luxury. So at one level, it's a luxury. You compound when you have philosophically the ability to think through very long term objectives, being very missionary in your objective, and not worrying about short term goals. And 98% of the world is not crazy enough to ignore the short term needs of daily life and daily travails, right? And so compounding doesn't happen if you think short term. Like it's like how if you look at your fixed deposit in the bank and you invest in one, 5 years reinvesting your interest every 3 months versus taking out the interest every 3 months, they're very, very different numbers at the end of 5 years. And that's when it's a very small compounding formula. So it's not about the formula, but it is for it to multiply the application of capital, internal more than even external. It has to hum in cruise control. It's not about like taking capital and spending it to reach a certain steady state. It's actually how you've made that steady state possible, after which is when the effects of compounding kick in. And most people don't make it to steady state. That's why it's so difficult, right? Even when it comes to discipline around health and savings, and these are the other things that compound, right? It's like it's easy to say yoga is good for you, but like how many people will actually do it, years at a stretch? And people want like 1 year or 1 quarter outcomes. You're not going to get much, right? And so anything which is, I think, long term good by definition compounds, in my view at least. And so if you want to hit that cruise control mode of compounding from an organizational standpoint, I think you need to have incredibly stable, well established culture. You need to have incredibly stable organizations, processes, teams, and you got to have customer love. And you've hit that point when you have what I believe are cash cow products, which means people could all go to sleep for a few weeks and everything will just hum along. That is a most people think it's a mythical end state. I actually believe that compounding is a more achievable end state than the mythical unicorn. So, so I would aspire to drive most of my founders that I partner with to the compounding journey, not the unicorn journey.
Got it. Got it. And Karthik, on the same train of thought, in fact, let me flip the question. If you look at last 4 or 5 years, for every company you look at which displays some power of compounding. There are some of the other companies which sort of have become much
Hmm.
larger and have grown much faster in a very short span of time.
Yep.
You see this going against the narrative of compounding, or what are your views on that?
No, I think I've been a part of like a bunch of WhatsApp groups where these debates are happening, right, for the last 2 years, where we write in spending, burning through as much capital as we did. Yesterday, I was speaking to a very seasoned second time founder, and everyone admits we just spent way too much money to get the business to where it was. So I think the circumstances, you can't like build, it's not you can't, it's very difficult to build in isolation, ignoring all external circumstances, right? So I think circumstances of, there's classic cycles of fear and greed. We've had like a incredibly long run of the greed cycle before the pause has come with the fear hiccup at this juncture. And as a result, short term memory, because that's what all humans are good at, points to the fact that we have celebrated, you know, these power law of venture investing yielded by short term unicorn formation rather than long term power of compounding outcomes. And I think if you go back 7, 8 cycles like in the US, I think you'll find this to be a false narrative. And you have to measure it over a longer period of time. I think we're taking a very ad hoc, short term sort of slice of time and trying to extrapolate these conclusions from them. So I think it is possible. So don't get me wrong, it is possible that market situations in terms of capital availability, a genius of an entrepreneur, market changes, regulatory changes, etc., create that rapid increase in valuation, which could be legitimate. I'm not saying all of it is fake, right? You can legitimately have a shot of like taking off. But my sort of answer to that is in the proverbial hare versus tortoise race story, who cares who's at the who's leading at when 25% of the race is done or 50% of the race is done. We only care about end outcomes, both the entrepreneur and me as the investor. So if the debate is about again which path to take, there is no doubt in my mind.
Great example, Karthik, regarding the hare and the tortoise. You touched upon this briefly because you spoke about the power law of compounding and the power law of venture. We've all heard about the power law of venture and we've all read books on that. What would be interesting to understand is, do you think there is also a power law of compounding in the venture ecosystem? And does it play in some different ways or does it play in the same way?
So I think there is. It's been difficult to exhibit for both ends of the private equity spectrum. For an early stage venture capitalist, you start very early in the journey, and the establishment of the various foundational pillars for compounding takes so long that when the compounding journey is beginning, you're actually out of the door. You've cashed in, there's pressure to show returns, you're raising your not just the next fund, but the fund after. Your LPs are saying, why haven't you given the money back? And so you're actually selling short, I would argue, right? And not playing the long game. On the private equity side, I think they're there for more consistent, shorter duration sort of appreciation in value. They're not playing the 10-year, 12-year games. They're only playing the 3-year, 5-year games. Right? If you look at most private equity term sheets, they will say that I want an exit in 5 years. Ours, at least for what it's worth, will say 7, 8 years. So all the stories that we have, some of them which are being featured in the podcast, are all stories pre 2010 or non VC funded. So I think there is no law on the power of compounding since VC terminates too early, takes its gains too early, and private equity folks play for too short a period of time. And even if it compounds at 25, 30%, it is very attractive, but it can only grow 3, 4x, not like 10, 20x, because they've come at a stable state. You know, I'll give you one personal anecdote, like my still conversation that I have with LPs. I say that the idealistic end state that I would want for a Blume is to have like the core activity that we do, which is early stage investing. You model that for like a 3-year period and see what you can get out of it in 10 years. I get that. I don't think that can change because you have to show money back at some point. But by the seventh, eighth, ninth year, you start getting a feel for what can actually play out in the power law of compound. So, for example, we played with opportunity funds into a company like Purple at 50 to 100 million, or an academy between 50 and 100 million, or a slice also at that level. And today they've all passed the unicorn mark for what it's worth. And I'm judging the founders, but then also I might have been fooling myself if I knew this for a fact. But now I'm actually quite clear that all of them want to build these companies to lever the power of compound, meaning they can still grow 10x from here. So when you take the totality of that multiplier, it's just an amazing journey.
Yeah.
But my time's run out. What do I do? So I used to tell LPs that I have this dream of reaching a point where we've returned enough capital that you allow us to keep the gains to run a perpetuity fund.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an evergreen fund. So I tell founders this as well. They say, how come you're not selling? Like a lot of people are selling. How come you're holding for much longer? How come you're rotating your capital? I say, I'm waiting for the damn power of compounding, right? And I think it's coming, right? It's almost there. So I'm tempted. And more importantly, as long as you believe you're coming to work and have confidence in your own ability to compound at 20, 25%, I want to be in on the journey. It's the cheapest ride you can get. You've been there for 10 years, done all the hard work.
Correct.
Founders put everything in place. That's why I said, machine is humming. Why would you want to get out? Right? And so I would say I want this perpetuity vehicle eventually in my end state. So I'm just saying, I want to, I do believe that's the only way you can lever the end state of like both, right? The power law of venture,
Yeah.
which creates those freak outcomes, but then also takes the very best ones.
So, Karthik, switching gears, coming to the second season of the Blume podcast, we've spoken to a fair number of guests. Would be interesting to understand what are some of the themes around compounding that you heard from our guests, which really resonated with you and which you really loved.
There are some learnings, there are some expectations. The longest journey we're going to record is someone who's close to 50 years in this journey of compounding.
Yes.
And the shortest is a little over 10 years, right, which is Lenskart. And I think the idea was to show a range of different businesses. The idea was to show a range of different styles. The idea was to show a few technology businesses, a few seemingly non-sexy, non-tech businesses, and yet extract the idea that themes, the behavior, the principles are about the same
Yes.
with such diversity in styles. And this is where entrepreneurs falter. The best ones know that there's nothing like copying. It's your own destiny. You take pages out of other people's playbooks here and there and adapt them to your strengths, of course. But every journey looks like ridiculously unique at one level, but there are always common patterns. So I think what has not surprised me is that element, because I've had a strong belief that that's what entrepreneurial journeys are about, and which is the individualistic in their pursuits, but they have common principles that have to fall in place for this kind of massive compounding to happen. There's no way to judge or test that, by the way, in the fifth or sixth year of the business. However hard you try, how much ever you grill, because they haven't reached that point.
Correct.
Still burning capital, still establishing sort of the gravitas of an organization that can build for another 10, 15 years. But once it's reached a point, you start seeing these remarkable similarities. And that's been kind of the biggest takeaway for me, that it validates that thinking. And I want more entrepreneurs and our audiences to understand that that's what it truly, truly takes. Not like a cool idea that may or may not last, 3-4 years from now, or be relevant for both the customers or for the, the market as a whole in 3-4 years. Because those are fine. I mean, there's nothing to shun any form of entrepreneurship, but like, I have a personal bias, as I said, towards the folks who want to long-term compound. And I'm constantly looking for what kind of triggers fall in place. And from the entrepreneurs, I'm giving them enough cues to take away from a new set of role models. And for the venture capitalists, I'm asking them to index only on such founders. They're the ones which will make us all proud as a Indian ecosystem, which has delivered at scale. Not so what if you have thousands and they're all dying? It's like everywhere else in the world, but like, who remembers them after the second year? Nobody. So And if you're looking for the characteristics, I do firmly believe these are the characteristics that you need to build legendary companies. So I'm just trying to extract them. I want the audience to, I don't want to profess what they are. I want them to be able to imbibe them from each one of our guests.
Great. Thanks, Karthik. Lots of good points in this conversation. Getting inside the mind of VC from a power of compounding perspective, understanding why we're indexing the entire season on a core thought, and what the audience can expect when our guests' episodes start rolling out. If you're listening to this podcast, we have also dropped our first episode. Please continue in the playlist and listen to it now. Thank you.